Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com, and now we're on to part 2 of Random Artist Feature about the band Dredg. And those first two albums are special albums, so I guess I can understand why the first part of the video would be about them. But the next album in 2005 was called Catch Without Arms. This was their... They signed to Interscope, I think, for El Cielo. I think it was released on Interscope, but this was really the album. The record labels were definitely trying to promote them, and it's definitely their poppiest record, but it's also a terrific album. That the first album that I actually got into them. I will say, to backtrack with Catch Without Arms, they had, between 2002 or whenever they finished El Cielo and this album, they had written a lot of songs, played a lot of them live. They even put out a demo called the Coquette demo, which had a lot of songs that didn't actually end up on this album, a little bit like Dream Theater and some other bands. And actually, Chris DeGarmo, I've mentioned in the Queensryche video I did, was a producer on this, or a co-producer. But there's a lot of songs like Uplifting News Channel, On Again, Off Again, I want to say, Running Through Propellers. There's a bunch of songs that are on the Coquette demo and they've been shared, and on the Traversing website they talk about that didn't make Catch Without Arms. But as it is, Catch Without Arms is a phenomenal record, and one I almost enjoy as much as all their others. But yeah, I used to listen to this at work. I remember in 2005, I used to buy Granny Smith apples, and I would think of this album with its sort of Granny Smith apple color. But this record, while it's very poppy and there's a lot of, like, melodically, a lot of similar sounding songs, it's still a really just addictive record. That in 2005 it was probably my most played record. That and Deadwing from Porcupine Tree, I was kind of going back and forth with those two albums, and then also the Mars Volta's Francis the Mute. But I actually think this is the one I listen to the most. My favorite songs on it, I mean, Bug Eyes was the single. That's probably the most well-known Dredg song still to this day. They did play on, I want to say, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and they played it, and there were Bug Eyes singles, and I actually have a DVD of it, which were given away at Best Buy. I just went out and bought a ton of them. They were for a penny if you bought something else or something. I just bought them all and started giving them out. I know the Bug Eyes, they had at least a Bug Eyes video in that, but no, Ode to the Sun, like a live staple. That's a terrific opening track on this record, as well as my favorite song on here is Hungover on a Tuesday. I love that song. So long to you, time for a cleanse. Yeah, the lyrics on this album are very, I don't know, relatable, I guess. Talking about 10 years gone, and talking about just the record industry, and just trying to go through, like, life in your, like, late 20s, early 30s. Sort of realizing different things. I don't know. Planting Seeds, Jamai Vu. Jamai Vu has a terrific guitar solo. It's sort of a ballad. Matryoshka and The Ornament, I think it is. Or Matryoshka? It's just Matryoshka. I thought The Ornament. Yeah, which that's a great closing piece, kind of melancholy. What's the other one? Not That Simple. I love that track. Kind of inspirational in a lot of ways. You can see the artwork, and by Drew the bass player, Roulette. And they actually, the vinyl for Catch Without Arms is finally being released and supposed to be coming out in April, sometime late April 22nd. So when I get that, I definitely will show that. But anyway, moving on. That was 2005. They toured frequently for that album. And they were, like I said, they were on Interscope, which is a major label, and unfortunately it didn't quite translate for a long time. I mean, I think they were supposed to become more popular, and I don't think that it resonated with the record label well enough, and so... But they did put out a live album, which is one of my favorite live albums of the last 15 years especially, called Live at the Fillmore, and a lot of these songs live sound really good, that take on a new identity almost. And I've listened to this, frequently. There's a lot of bootlegs of Dredg, of course, but the production on this live album and the mixing is really good. As far as, it's got a track list that's primarily stuff from Catch Without Arms and El Cielo. But there's a couple unreleased songs on here. I want to say The Warbler and then More of the Ornament, which they later released as a full track on their most recent record, Chuckles, and Mr. Squeezy. Stone by Stone, that's one of the other tracks that was a track they recorded that didn't make Catch Without Arms, maybe like a B-side. That with Uplifting News. Son of My Tones is a terrific song. I'd put that in my top 10 Dredg songs probably. In fact, I should do a list, because WatchMojo.com will never do a top 10 Dredg songs. I should do a list on Dredg songs. But anyway, so that was 2006, and then they had this long period where, again, they were touring a lot, and they were demoing, they had a lot of new songs. They finally, it took forever, it seemed like, put out the next record. It was called the Pariah, the Parrot, the Delusion, which I was so excited for this record. I couldn't have been more excited for an album. Well, not true, but I do have the vinyl too, which I believe there's one song on here that it actually kind of skips on. I know, because that's what I think it was Mark Engels, the guitar player, told me when I had him sign it. I can show it though, but this is an amazing record, and I would, you had from El Cielo to Catch Without Arms to this. Every one of these records are phenomenal, and that's how Dredg really became one of my favorite bands. Yeah, look at the stain on this sucker. Because they just really couldn't do no wrong. Leitmotif is a terrific debut album. They just weren't fully catching on a mainstream level, even as popular as bands like the Mars Volta or Coheed and Cambria, which I didn't understand. Their songs were melodic and accessible enough, but yet they were still very atmospheric and experimental. I mean, that maybe they were too experimental. I don't know. They weren't an image thing or the record label. And the fact that Interscope didn't want to keep them was probably having to do with that. But as a result of that, at least. But this album, in some ways, is like a combination of El Cielo and Catch Without Arms. I call it the Pariah. But it's weird. It's like if you have a go-to Dredg album, they're one of these bands that they're so good that you could say any of their albums, really, any of those three especially. I guess I always, like my fiance, when I gave her a mix, the first song I ever had her listen to from Dredg was Gathering Pebbles, which has kind of an 80s vibe to it, but it has this great atmosphere, great kind of melancholy, nostalgic sound to it almost, but it still sounds like Dredg, and the production's still pristine. It's one of my favorite songs they've ever done. Suffice to say, she really never became much of a Dredg fan, even though she liked that song. Many cases of bands that I like, that she'll like one track, and that's the only thing that ever does anything for her. But I would say among the others, there's so many good songs on this album. Quotes is a terrific sort of epic sort of, I wouldn't call it melancholy exactly. It's talking about like drug addiction, some other things, but it's one of those songs I just love every time I hear it. And it is somewhat long. It's like it goes on for like 7 minutes if I'm not mistaken. And I've got, of course, a couple copies of the CD, which I showed just a minute ago. I would say Information and Pariah, I think it is. Look at the little like whale or whatever you want to call that. There's so much of like an art band. Like I talked about Cloud Cult in the last episode of this. Dredg are art rock as much as they are. They called themselves like audio scenery at one point, I heard. But the Pariah, the Parrot, the Delusion, Saviors, very riffy. I don't know. Morning This Morning is just also another one of these kind of melancholy ballads that just I always love hearing. Long Days and Vague Clues. They have a couple tracks on here that are sort of instrumental interludes with like cello and stuff like that, which really work. Light Switch lyrically is really good. Ireland, talking about not wanting to leave home, but they're ironic lyrics, which is kind of funny. I remember it was a weird response to some people over in, I want to say, Spain or somewhere in Europe, Germany maybe, saying, why would you never want to leave home if you have everything there, There's a lot of things to see outside where you live. But, I love this record, and that's why I'm really wanting to hear more from them. So in 2000, so that was 2009. In 2011, they put out their most recent record, which from an artwork standpoint and a font standpoint, they changed a bunch of things. It's called Chuckles and Mr. Squeezy. And they worked with Dan the Automator, that hip-hop guy who was a producer and stuff. And, you know, this album, most of the fans didn't care for. They liked the songs more live, but I actually am of the belief, while I don't think they put out an album as poor as this, or I think this is my least favorite, I guess would be the best way to put it. It's still a good record, and I would listen to it over a lot of other bands' albums. From specifics, the first single was one of the best songs, The Thought of Losing You. I still think that's a terrific song. Very memorable. The Ornament, which was the continuation of the track on Catch Without Arms, except for it has lyrics at the section on this. Upon Returning, Another Tribe, Down Without a Fight, very kind of lyrically talking about whatever, you know. You're not going down without a fight, you know, more or less, and among other things, I guess. I mean, it's not a record I've listened to tons since 2011, but I think, personally, I don't think it's being as being as honest. I don't know if, you know, I'm definitely not going to hate it throughout history. I mean, I just think among their catalog, they've had such good music among their whole catalog, it just ranks at the bottom. But people didn't like the fact it's electronic, and I don't know. It was sort of experimental. It was a different side to their music. And, you know, if they never put out another album like it, I totally applaud them for trying something different. So, and I can tell you that I've read online that on some forums and stuff like that, that since 2011, they've sort of been touring a little bit, playing like anniversary shows of certain albums, but they haven't done a lot. But the members have done some other bands. Mark Engels had a band, and I think Drew Roulette has a band, different band doing other styles. Like Mark Engels' band, I think, is sort of in the metal vein, sort of old school black metal, death metal. But they are now getting together, supposedly, like in February of 2016, just to write new music. So, and I read an interview with Dino Campanella, the drummer who also plays piano, keyboards, saying that he doesn't think they're really ever going to break up per se, as long as they want to make music. They always like making music together. It's just how much music, what format, and how often it comes out is really up in the air. But you know, it sounds like they're going to work on a new album, and it may come out. My guess would be 2017 or 2018. If it came out in 2016, maybe even like a single. They did a cover of "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" a couple years ago, and just put it online. But I love Dredg. Probably always will be a Dredg fan. They're one of my favorite bands in the last 10, 15 years, and I kind of think of them a little bit like Dream Theater, because their fan base and just being a fan of Dredg has led me to discover so many other bands. Are they pure progressive rock? Not exactly. They're more a hybrid of, you know, I used to say U2 meets Tool, or they have a heavy Pink Floyd influence, but they're not like real about the technical aspect of their music. They're more about, you know, thought out, you know, art and ideas, and, you know, anyway. Thanks for watching.